Good morning and welcome to the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, Thursday, December 14th, 2023 meeting. Madam Clerk, would you please call roll?
Thank you, Chair Osborne. For the roll call, Directors Williams? Here. Capps?
Here.
Hartman?
Here.
Nelson? Here.
Here.
Lavanino?
Here.
Patino? Rouse?
Here.
Clark?
Here.
Perotti?
Here.
Infanti? Julian?
Here.
King?
Here.
And Chair Osborne.
Here. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We'll move on to public comment. The public may address the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments on any subject within the jurisdiction of the board that is not included as part of this agenda. Comments shall be limited to no more than 15 minutes, divided among those desiring to speak, but no person shall speak longer than 3 minutes. Madam Clerk, do we have any requests to speak here in Santa Barbara?
Chair Osborne, we have no request for public comment in Santa Barbara or online.
Oh, great. Is there any requests in the Santa Maria area?
Nobody here.
Great, thank you. All right. We will close public comment and move on to item number 4, consent calendar. Are there any items that need to be pulled or recused?
Chair Osborne, Director Williams will need to recuse himself from item 4E.
4B?
E is an A.
E. Thank you. All right. Any other item to be pulled by any member of the board?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Madam Chair. Sorry, I need to recuse myself from the minutes. I was not present for the last meeting.
And that's Director King?
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Abstain is what you'll do. All right. Any other? All right. Then we will address 4E first.
I'll go ahead and read it in the record. Item 4E, Highway 101 Carpinteria Segment 4A. 4E1, adopt Resolution 2332, approving cooperative agreement 050446 with Caltrans for the Highway 101 Carpinteria project and acknowledge appropriation of funds. And 4E2, approve and authorize the chair to execute a cooperative agreement with Caltrans 050446 for the phase of work to cover biological monitoring. The total agreement amount is $40,000 from Sbcag share of state gas tax dollars from the Regional Improvement Program. 4E3, approve and authorize the executive director to execute closeout report upon project completion.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions by the board of directors?
Madam Chair, move approval.
All right. I will give you a second. Roll call vote, please.
Just for the record, Chair Patino just arrived.
Okay, thank you.
Director Williams, he's recused. Capps. Aye. Hartman.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Lavanino.
Aye.
Infanti. Julian.
Aye.
King.
Aye.
Patino.
Aye.
Perotti.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Rouse.
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 10-0.
All right, I will
Nothing's
entertain a motion for the rest of consent calendar with Director Williams returning.
So moved. Second.
All right. Any public comment on the rest of consent calendar? Hearing none,
No.
We've got a motion and a second. Can we please have a roll call vote noting that King is abstaining from the minutes?
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps.
Aye.
Hartman.
Aye.
Nelson. Director Nelson?
Aye.
Thank you. Lavanino?
Aye.
Infante? Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Perotti?
Aye.
Clark? Aye. Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 12-0.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to 5, review and discussion items. 5A, Madam Clerk.
5A, approval of Senate Bill 125, SB 125, state transit funding and update on submittal of transit intercity rail capital program regional application to California State Transportation Agency. 5A1, receive updates on Senate Bill 125 transit and rail funding and regional transit and intercity rail capital program application for Santa Barbara County. 5A2, recommend approval of SB 125 initial allocation plan project list by Sbcag Board of Directors. And 5A3, receive presentation on list of prospective projects for Sbcag regional TIRSIP competitive application and recommend SB staff collaborate with local partners on final list of projects for approval by Sbcag Board in February 2024.
Thank you. Mr. Kochek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Osborne, Directors, happy holidays. Sergeant Scott with Sbcag. Today, we have the slide deck up, which was included in the staff report. Next slide, please. So for your board today, what we wanted to present is an update on a lot of great work that we've been doing with our transit partners over the last few months related to new funding coming from the state. And today, we need to approve a project list that we need to submit to the state by December 31st. And then we also wanted to share an update on a grant application that we'd like to submit with transit partners to the state in spring of next year. Next slide, please. So some background on the presentation today. We learned a few months ago that through the state budget that there would be $5.1 billion available statewide for regional agencies to work with transit partners to identify projects that need operating funding as well as capital funding. A lot of this was as a result of the impact of COVID on transit partners and recovering from that. For our region, what that means is that we're getting about $53 million in one-time money that we can use over 4 years. So this is really good news for our region and the state. The funding is being allocated to regional agencies to work with transit partners. The final guidelines were provided by the state in September, so we've been working feverishly with transit partners to identify the needs as well as the projects that would be submitted. And so we're happy to provide that update today. Next slide. So in October, we provided your board with an update on the funding and an approach to distributing the funding to partners. And so what we did was we used a framework that your board approved a couple years ago through another state program called the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program. And what that allows is that there's funding distributed to the partners, which is under the 90%. But your board also supported the idea of taking 10% of the funding and using that as a match to leverage additional state funding through a competitive program. So with that, we have the 10% set aside for the leveraging, and then the 90% is going directly to the transit partners for their projects. So 45% is for North County projects, 45% for South Coast, and then 10% to regional. Next slide, please. So this is a fund table. This is a breakdown of the funding showing how we're distributing it. So it's got the funding for administration for Sbcag, and then the funding is broken out by the two programs through the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program, which is an existing program, and the Zero Emission Transit Capital Program, which is a brand new program the state created through Senate Bill 125. So we show the 10% or the 5.3 million as the off the top for leveraging, and then below you can see how much money is going to the transit partners. Next slide, please. This further breaks down the funding and lets you know how much funding is being distributed by program, by sub-regional pot, by year, to give you an idea. The bulk of the money is coming in the first 2 years, and so that's where you see a lot more projects being programmed. And then the The third and fourth years are focused mostly on the zero emission transit capital program. Next slide, please. Now we move on to the recommended projects for the funding, the formula funding. As I mentioned, we worked with transit partners on identifying what their needs are over the next 4 years and then what projects will be eligible. Back in October, we showed an extensive list. It was $150 million in need compared to $50 million available. So we weren't able to fund all of the projects, but we still have identified projects that meet the needs of the transit partners. So this first list provides the projects for the North County operators by agency. And so the focus is on purchase of electric buses or vans along with the charging infrastructure, as well as facility improvements for City of Lompoc and City of Santa Maria, or Santa Maria Regional Transit. And then there are other improvements that are related for St. Ines Valley Transit for administration of their service as well. Next slide, please. On the South Coast, the one agency that submitted for the Senate Bill 125 funding was Santa Barbara Metropolitan Transit District. They have significant needs related to terminals that they're building, and so you can see the list. So they received prior competitive transit intercity rail capital funding, and so this funding is helping additional facilities. And then they have some bus capital needs that they're going to be using the funding for as well. Next slide, please. And then finally, this is the regional list of projects. So the funding is for Clean Air Express, for Sbcag Rail, and another project that will be new would be a countywide contactless fare system. And so this is an innovative idea that's being proposed with the funding. For the Clean Air Express, you can see a lot of needs related to capital. The Clean Air Express is the only agency out of the whole list that is going to be using money for operating. The big reason for that is that our operators did receive significant federal funding a couple years ago to help with COVID. And so those needs are being addressed with the federal funds, and then the new funding that we're getting from the state is for capital needs. Next slide, please. So I will just take a quick pause to see if there's any questions on the list of projects that we're proposing for the formula funding for submittal to the state. All right, thank you. For the second part of the presentation, as I mentioned, your board approved taking 10% of the money for leveraging for the competitive program. This shows significant support to the state that our region wants to apply this funding, which could have just gone for all projects, but showing that as a symbolic gesture by your board. So what's happening is that the California State Transportation Agency will have another cycle of the competitive program coming up, and the funding will be eligible as a match. They're expecting $800 million to $1 billion available for the next cycle, which will be the 7th. Those applications will be due in March, and then we'll find out in June on the award. The big thing here is that what we're doing is we're taking the money, the 10%, and then also show that transit partners are also taking additional money from their SB 125 pots as leverage to secure funds for the region. Next slide, please. So this is a table that's included. And what we're doing today is providing a conceptual list of projects for you for feedback. We're going to come back to your board again in February before the applications are due with the final vetted list of projects. So we're looking for any feedback today from your board. But as you can see, this is a very robust list of projects that focus on capital needs as well as facility needs. There is also looking at the idea that we shared back in October was that we have some rail safety needs in our county. So these are projects both in South Coast and North County that have additional needs. The first one being the Cabrillo Boulevard Rail Bike Pedestrian Project in the City of Santa Barbara. The second one is the Highway 1166 intersection improvements in the City of Guadalupe. This is at the Union Pacific grade crossing. And then the final project is the City of Goleta San Jose Creek Bike Path. That bike path crossing near Union Pacific Railroad, the City of Goleta has broken out that segment, which is funded by state active transportation program funding, but there's additional need at that crossing, and so we'd be including that project with the list of other projects. And the one thing I wanted to note was there is a significant match being provided by Sbcag and our local partners, which will make us even more competitive at the statewide process. Next slide, please. So for the TIRSUP competitive application, if we are awarded funding per feedback at the October board meeting, we are going to identify which projects were awarded funding and then how to use the 10% as a match for that equitably. So we're going to see, between north and south and regional, which projects are recommended for funding and how to apply that 10%. If we are not awarded funding, then what our proposal was is that we would just take that 10% and then redistribute to the transit partners using the 10 split before. Next slide, please. So we did present this to the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee last week, and they unanimously recommended approval of the SP 125 formula list as well as the conceptual competitive application. Next slide, please. In terms of, I'm wrapping up here. So in terms of next steps, we're looking for approval by your board on the formula list of projects and then the conceptual TIRSUP competitive project list. And then we're going to submit to the state of California in a couple weeks on the final. And then over the next couple of months, we're going to work with our transit partners on finalizing the list of projects for the competitive application with authorization to submit by your board in February. We'll submit the application in March, and then in June, what's going to happen is we're going to know what happened with the competitive grant, and then we'll come back with an update to your board to make any modifications accordingly. Next slide, please. So finally, transit partners for all their collaboration on this. This is a really big lift over a 3 or 4 month period. And so they rolled up their sleeves with us and provided that list, so we're thankful for the partnership with them. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I can take any questions at this time.
Thank you. Any questions? Director Williams.
No question, just want to thank you for the breadth of this and, hope that we, in each one of these jurisdictions, match it with the incentive funds available from whatever their utility is. So in some of those, well, that would be Lompoc, or in some of those, that would be 3CE. And then, there are other incentives through PG&E and SCE too, not as big as 3CE, but we should be trying to leverage this so we can spread out the money and accomplish more.
Any questions or comments from Santa Maria?
There's one here.
Okay.
None. from
Director
Santa Maria.
Peretti.
Thank you. I just have a comment. It's nice to see the San Jose Creek project on there. Recently, I had a meet and greet at the farmers market Sunday, and a lot of folks were asking, when is that going to be done? We want to be able to use that bike trail path. So thank you, helping move that along a little bit faster. Thanks.
All right, before I entertain an motion, is there any request for, sorry, thank you.
Thank you. First of all, this seems like a really intelligent way to go about it, and appreciate that the careful thought about how to use these monies wisely. My comment is just on a small matter, the countywide integrated fare system. It's only $250,000, but we've been working towards that for a long time, and I just wondered if you could describe it in a little more detail.
Thank you, Director Hartman, through the chair. I'm actually going to defer to our Rail and Transit Director on that question.
Good morning. Aaron Bonfilio for Sbcag. Through the chair, in short, the $250,000 is the local match. We'll be applying for a full project cost of $2.5 million overall. And the concept is to equip every transit operator in this county with contactless fare card readers, so people can pay with both with their bank cards, credit cards, debit cards, but also with their regional fare pass product. The technology is out there, and so we're exploring our options, but the ability to go from one system to the other seamlessly without having to use different pieces of fare media is the goal. And we're on our way there. We have some transfer agreements in the works, but this would be the technological piece for that.
That's terrific. It sounds so easy in concept, but I think it takes a lot, as you're implying with those agreements, to make it really work. So having it seamless so that people can move from one mode of transit to another, I think is key to making it convenient and having them use it. So thank you.
All right. Now, is there any public comment?
Chair Osborne, we have no requests for public comment in Santa Barbara or anyone online.
All right, anyone in Santa Maria?
No one in Santa Maria.
Thank you. Bring it back for a motion on the approval of SB 125 Initial Allocation Plan Project List by Sbcag Board of Directors.
So moved?
Second?
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Director Williams.
Aye.
Capps.
Aye.
Hartman.
Aye.
Levanino.
Aye.
Infante.
Aye.
Julian.
Aye.
King.
No.
Patino.
Aye.
Perotti.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Rouse.
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 12-1.
All right. Item 5B, Clean Air Express Transit Service Agreement.
Yes, good morning.
I need to read it in the record.
She needs to read it into the
Oh,
record.
sorry.
That's okay.
5B, Clean Air Express Transit Service Agreement. Receive and file report regarding recent contract negotiations with Clean Air Express contractor American Star Tours.
All right.
All right. Good morning, Madam Chair, Board of Directors. For the record, my name is Aaron Bonfilio, Rail and Transit Programs Director for Sbcag. This item is simply a quick verbal update to let you all know that we have been in negotiations with our contractor, American Star Tours, which operates the Clean Air Express service. Earlier this year, the longtime owner sold to a new ownership team, and shortly after the sale, they had completed a second round, I guess you could say, of due diligence, and approached Sbcag in September and asked us to consider a handful of contract adjustments, or at least consider certain changes to the agreement. Through negotiations, we've arrived at one area in particular of focus, which is the cost of insurance. Year over year for our contractor, it's gone up roughly 50%. This may be in part due to the ownership change, but the reality is Sbcag, through its acquisition of a new set of buses, also increased the value of the fleet considerably. We went from buses that were well beyond their useful life to buses that are midlife and not going to be nearing replacement for a shorter period of time at least. The notion here is that we have two amendment options for consideration. Presently, we're reviewing those with legal counsel, and we'll be bringing those back for the board's consideration in January. This is simply to provide you with an update to let you know that this is ongoing and that we'll be coming back to the board shortly.
Any questions? Director Williams.
No, that was me turning off my mic.
All right. Any questions out of Santa Maria? Hearing none, any public comment on this item?
None from Santa Maria.
Nope, thanks.
Chair Osborne, we have no requests for public comment.
All right. All right. Seeing none, this is receive and file. We thank you for that, and we'll move on to item 5C.
Before we move on, I forgot to ask Director Nelson if he voted aye on the first.
Previous, on the
previous one?
5A item?
Yes?
I'm going to go ahead and abstain.
Oh, you're abstaining, okay. Thank you.
All right. Just for the public's awareness, we have a new system here, and we're all learning it. The bank that used to tell the chair whose lights were on and aren't on is gone, so we're depending on that. And we have a couple of individuals who are participating at remote locations simply because of the work now being done in Santa Maria. So they're also learning a new dais for a temporary purpose. So just for clarity, if anybody's like, why does it seem a little discombobulated? Well, that's why. So thank you for that. All right, so please read 5C.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Madam Chair, this is Director King. On these microphones, when you turn your head away from it, apparently we lose the audio. So when somebody's speaking into the microphone, if they could talk directly into the mic, it's easier for us because the modulation keeps going up and down when they turn away.
Great feedback. Thank you for that. All right. So noted. Now we're ready for 5C to be read into record.
Item 5C, Clean Air Express fare increase. 5C1, receive presentation on fare change options for the Clean Air Express bus service. 5C2, discuss fare change options for the Clean Air Express bus service. 5C3, approve a fare change option.
Sbcag Rail and Transit Program Director. So today, next slide, please. Today we're going to talk about three general areas of the process that we've undertaken so far. The fare proposal, what it was, how we went about surveying our riders, asking them about it, the next steps that we'd be taking in implementing a fare change, the analysis we've done with the response from the public, as well as with regard to budget and ridership trends. And then lastly, some implementation options for your consideration in light of the results we received from our process. Next slide. So why are we here today? Sbcag, as part of its ongoing planning efforts for the Clean Air Express, completed its short-range transit plan. That was adopted in October of 2019. Shortly thereafter, staff presented back to the North County Sub-Regional Committee regarding the recommendations that were identified in the short-range transit plan. Among them were recommendations to identify and seek out new revenue streams for the Clean Air Express, including the eligibility or to be able to receive Federal Transit Administration funds. I'm happy to say that Sbcag has done that. We've now become eligible for Federal Transit Administration funds. We're going through the process now with Region 9. And because of the census change most recently, we are eligible for formula funding for the Clean Air Express. That does not come at a cost of the formula funding in the North County, which previously and continues to go to the two transit operators there, Santa Maria Regional Transit and Colt. That said, an additional recommendation was to return for periodic. February of 2020, staff returned to the North County Sub-Regional Committee with a fare proposal that had been developed out of the immediate financial need of the Clean Air Express. And keep in mind that was prior to its eligibility for Federal Transit Administration revenues and prior to what current levels of STA and TDA funding are at. That is to say, there's additional state funding that the Clean Air Express has received through formula process in partnership with the county in particular, but those funds were not identified and not provided on a consistent basis at the time of this recommendation. And what you see here on this slide are what the current fares were in 2019 and remain to this day. In March of 2020, that process to raise rates, which are there proposed on the screen, was put on pause. The industry nationally changed significantly at that time. Transportation travel more or less shuttered across the country, and with it, Clean Air Express ridership dropped. It dropped approximately 70% outright in the beginning. We also reduced service at that time. Approximately 60% of the service was put back onto the street in the following months, and then now we're presently at about 75% of that level of service from the early days. Next slide. So the timeline of events. Sbcag, through its board policy action previous to this, had taken action to approve a fair increase process, which requires that any proposed increase go to the riders, first through public noticing, then through a survey process for public comment, and then finally come back to the board for review and approval or action if they so choose. What you see here is the timeline of the events as they occurred in 2023 in lead up to today's meeting here on the 14th. Next slide. So why do we ask the board to consider a fair increase initially, and why was the recommendation made? Well, as you can see in some fuzzy detail here, the contract cost per hour over time. One of the aspects of the contract today is that it's at a fixed rate on a daily basis, which is part of the reason why our contractors come back and ask for consideration of a rate increase. The fixed fees that they identified in 2020 or 2021 when they proposed, they believe are not currently meeting the current needs. But that said, prior to 2018, Sbcag's contracts generally had a formula applied to them, an escalation rate, cost of living adjustment associated with CPI. So over time, the cost of the contract has gone up, and at every renewal and every reprocurement, we can expect contract rates to jump as well. At the same time, it doesn't take a lot to guess that national CPI has gone up considerably, especially since 2020, the pandemic. 18% of the overall 28% increase for the last 10 years occurred within the last 3 years. That said, the ridership impact in 2020 has taken its toll. What you see on the other half of the screen there with regard to fare box and fare box recovery to use to describe how much fare revenue we receive in relation to the cost of operations. That metric is significant because in many jurisdictions, if you don't make a certain level of fare box recovery, for example, 20%, then you lose state funding in the following cycle for the Transportation Development Act formula flow. In our case, Clean Air Express has been well above the 20% number since its inception. And in fact, because of the use of Measure A funds specifically, we're not at risk of falling below the 20% number. Measure A is considered locally generated revenue. So in addition to passenger fares, the Clean Air Express has no tangible risk with regard to the fare box recovery mandate by the state. That's not necessarily the same for all of our transit operators in the county that do not use Measure A as part of their operations support. But in the case of Clean Air Express, our focus on the fare box recovery is really just to show you that in relation to the overall cost of the service, our two primary funding sources, fare revenues and Measure A, have not necessarily kept up with the cost of operations. Ridership in 2020 decreased our fare revenue roughly by half, and over time we've been able to build that back up, but it still hasn't gotten back to those levels in 2019, which were among the levels that triggered us to ask for a fare increase in the first place. Next slide. Here is some greater detail with regard to our operating revenues, not necessarily our cost of operations, but just the overall operating revenues. As you can see, in the early years, they actually exceeded our cost of operations, and historically they have. So there has been a balance built up over time, small though it may be. We do not fully expend all of our Measure A historically, and with the advent of the CARES and CRISA and ARPA and the various stimulus bills from the pandemic, Federal Transit Administration revenues, or FTA revenues, were provided to Clean Air Express on a one-time basis from our partners in Santa Maria, City of Lompoc, SBMTD, and Caltrans. So those 4 years, or those four allocations of funding, have provided additional funding for Clean Air Express service, and you see that there with the somewhat gray color on the bar graph. At the same time, you'll note that the fare revenues have declined, or did decline, and then are slowly growing back up, and you can see our projected fare revenues for 23-24, roughly $500,000, just to make it easy. We ended at just over $500,000 last year. We believe we'll be above our projection in the budget, but for purposes of this slide, I'm using the budget numbers. Also noted in the chart are the SB 125 funds, which were just approved with the item before you. and those are noted across the top, which are critical to maintain that funding balance where we have Federal Transit Administration revenues going away. Next year, in 25-26, or a year and a half from now, I guess, we'll be eligible again for Federal Transit Administration revenue, so they're going to start to trickle back in. Unfortunately, we are not going to receive the full amount of FTA revenues until 3 years after the start of service, or the start of our eligibility, which will be in 27-28. Slide. So, as part of the process to solicit feedback regarding the proposal that was originally designed in 2019, we put out a passenger survey. We notified the passengers both on the bus, at bus stops, online, email, and through public notices in the papers of record, City of Lompoc, City of Santa Maria, and the SB Independent. That said, we received over 130 responses back in English and Spanish, both at public events and through the online survey. All of our information that was gathered was put back into the survey for analysis purposes, so we have a consolidated database. Out of the 250 odd one-way riders we have per day, which we believe is representative of both ends of the day, generally speaking, most of our passengers take a round trip, and those that don't are offset by others that don't take a round trip. So that is, the universe of riders is somewhere in the range of about 250 or 253 unique riders based on October 2023's data period was conducted. The survey itself, having 135 responses out of 253, we believe provides about a 90% confidence level for what it's worth. Next slide. So this is just a brief snapshot of the survey responses. I find that these 4 questions were pretty informative and instructive. We'll get to another one in just a moment that provides an interesting picture of the Clean Air Express ridership. This is fairly representative of what we see through our driver logs as well with regard to the riders, the number of people who take which route per day. I would say that the Santa Maria routes are weighted a little bit under what we see on a daily basis, but generally speaking, it's about a 65-35 split, Lompoc residents or Lompoc riders versus Santa Maria riders. How do they ride? A lot of people ride daily or multiple times per week. And that's testament to the next question, which is how they pay their fare. They pay with a monthly pass. The cost benefit for a monthly pass, if you use it 40 times per month, is same thing is true with our multi-ride ticket books, which some people who don't ride as often will use. But all told, you can see the breakdown of number of regular riders, how they pay, and the types of fare media they have. The approximate household income I thought was instructive as well, because it also spreads. You can see there's a pretty large swath of folks who ride the bus. Not necessarily what you might see on larger systems or more traditional fixed route localized systems, but with this commuter base that we have quite a few people traveling to jobs in the South Coast that, well, let's just say they have a higher household income, generally speaking. That said, next slide, please. Approximately half of our riders indicated that they would either stop riding or ride less if we proceeded with the fare increase. Now, granted, this is through the survey responses. I'm sure there's a national emotional inclination to respond that they would stop riding altogether if any rates were proposed. If Starbucks asked us tomorrow if we raise rates, would you still buy coffee? Reply back in kind. But that said, it is significant when you consider the typical trend in transit, which has been established through a long-standing best practice, the Simpson curtain rule, is that for every 3% you go up, you can anticipate about 1% decline. Same is true for reducing rates. There are studies that show that when you reduce rates by 3% or more, you get about a 1% bump per percentage scale. So in a typical case, if we were to raise rates 20%, ridership might drop 6.7% when you factor in the Simpson curtain rule. In our case, we found that 50% would respond, or roughly 50% responded that they would stop riding or ride less. And as we dug into the cross tabulations, we found that the household income was the top predictor of that response. So effectively, if you jump back one slide, sorry, Sarkis. For the folks that were making $75,000 or less per household, those were the individuals that said that they would stop riding the bus. There was the greatest jump in that response rate when we filtered for household income. So I mentioned a bit about fare elasticity and the studies that have been done. Again, this points out the net impact in potential fare revenue. For the case of the 23-24 year, we have $500,000 budgeted in fare revenue. That, if the decline were to result in what we see through the surveys, could be a decline of approximately $200,000 a year in fare revenue. At the same time, if we saw the decline or close to the Simpson-Curtin rule, it would be approximately a gain of $70,000 in fare revenue. That's based on the proposed rates. Next slide. So recognizing that and hearing the feedback from our riders, in particular some of the anecdotal responses, which you'll see in the survey, folks asked for all kinds of things. They said, don't do it, it'll mean I can't go to work anymore. They also said, if you do this, can you do it over a period of time? Can you smooth it out? For example, BART in Northern California recently adopted a fare change of 11%, and rather than doing it over 2 years. BART's policy, mind you, is driven specifically by CPI, and that every 2 years they use CPI for an inflation-based adjustment for their riders. So it's somewhat predictable. Passengers generally, ideally, can stomach the change because of other changes in the economy. But in the case of BART, even with their 11% change, they've decided to split that into two. And BART is among probably the most extreme examples right now, where in the state they are one of the driving factors behind SB 125, having lost a significant chunk of their ridership and therefore fare revenue. That's an aside to the prior item. So we developed a series of, or a couple of other options for the board to consider. In addition to potentially smoothing out the fare increase over time, we have a third option, which is to postpone it altogether. But the fare increases, effectively the options that were developed were done in recognition of the additional revenues that have come to pass. In addition to this, I believe it's important that Clean Air Express Sbcag adopt a fair price adjustment policy, possibly similar to something like what BART in the Bay Area is doing related to a periodic adjustment of every 2 years. There are other ways to do it as well. One of my former agencies, Muni, has a fare box recovery ratio minimum that they attempt to meet every year at 25%. So we could do something similar where we set a minimum, see how we're doing, and decide to update in response to that. Also, as part of the prior item with SB 125, you approved a process to apply some of that funding towards capital, and in that case, we'll be investing in fare equipment, which will streamline boarding, speed things up a bit, but also increase revenues. I've seen over multiple deployments of cash counting fare boxes, you see cash revenue go up almost instantaneously, even if ridership doesn't go up. Simply put, if the box on the bus is counting the number of coins and dollars put into the bus, more people pay, and the enforcement is much more streamlined. Not suggesting that people have been skimming or sneaking onto the bus, but our cash revenue, as you saw in the prior slides, is not as significant as maybe other agencies as a ratio of total revenue. That said, we're also after additional revenue streams. The FTA revenue in particular, at this point in time, we know we'll receive roughly on the order of about $200,000 a year just by the number of miles that we operate. But if we implement things like passenger counters and provide additional data to the FTA, we'll receive additional revenue on an annual basis. Roughly 3x what we would be getting in the first year, we anticipate getting by the third year after we go through the certification process for that additional data collection. And last but not least, I think there's some additional revenue streams like advertising we all ought to consider. I know that MTD, I think, is alone in the county in offering advertising on the side of its buses, but the Clean Air Express has high visibility. Highway 101 is a peak market, so I'm told by the folks who've approached us, and there's a lot of impressions and potentially a significant amount of revenue relative to operation that might be gained. I guess last but not least, we'll be partnering with our local agencies. We already have a strong relationship with the county. We've been working with MTD and Santa Maria Regional Transit with regard to some long-term planning. Another recommendation that came out of the short-range transit plan was to consider the consolidation or at least distribution of the Clean Air Express routes back to their home agencies. In the case of the city of Lompoc, they're not quite ready yet for the Lompoc routes, but our talks with Santa Maria Transit are promising, and they believe that they can work with us over the long term to help absorb or maybe take over some of the Clean Air Express routes. That said, there should be some economies of scale. If that's not the case, then of course we do what's most prudent and best for operations. MTD, same thing in the I guess near to long term, is interested in supporting Sbcag with regard to the Lompoc set of routes, and they have a series of number of drivers in that area already. So operationally, it might be much more efficient and convenient for both agencies. Next slide. Okay, so I'll take a break there if there are any questions. All right. Can the North County hear okay? We'll go for it. Okay.
Yeah, Aaron, if you could kind of speak more directly into the microphone, because when you turn away, we lose the audio.
Certainly, Mayor. All right. I'm turning towards the screen to see what I'm talking about, but I'll keep it, I'll do my best. We have three options that were prepared by staff. The first option is to proceed with the 2019 approach that was developed by my predecessor and the consultant team, effectively raising rates fare media that we sell by 20%. And then the third being that we would raise the single trip cash fare from $7 to $10. This was an attempt at trying to stem the gulf in what was likely to come from the operational cost increases over time. However, I'm not sure that they had ample time to do much after February 2020 to get feedback from the public. Certainly, they didn't provide any additional options or return. We paused that process and have come back now that ridership has recovered, and we see a steady stream of growth over the past 3 years. Next slide. Option two, which is in response a lot having to do with the feedback we received, requesting that we smooth out the increase over time, also taking from some of our other transit partners that have done this in the past. Speaking personally, we did this in the Ventura County area when we raised rates for the Coastal Express route, which we help fund here. The rest of the county there in Ventura County, we raised rates over a 2-year period as well. And as you can see, the estimated or approximate income or net difference in fare revenue would be on the low end of $24,000 a year, with assuming the rider attrition that comes from those best practices, to an additional $100,000 a year, assuming no change in ridership growth whatsoever, although we have seen about a 4.5% increase year over year, but rather just simply by virtue of raising the rates, we would get approximately $100,000 more per year. Next slide. And then lastly, this slide, frankly, would be to stem any ridership attrition whatsoever, postpone the rate increase until a time that we know it's needed. We do not have that fare revenue shortfall today. We won't have it for the next handful of years, given SB 125, which are just one-time funds, but also the increase in federal transit administration revenue and the increase in county LTF and TDA. County, which I believe will come back to your board, the county supervisors, in the near future, we've identified a formula program with them where they're going to distribute funding on an annual basis in a much more consistent manner. We're happy for that. All of the transit operators are going to have a set number that they can count on. But that said, that additional revenue is only part of the puzzle, and fare revenue has been a significant portion of our operating support over the years. And with that, I believe... Next slide. Okay. So just to recap, there are 3 effective actions today. 1, hear the presentation. 2, discuss it. And 3, select one of the options. With regard to next steps, we'll be implementing that with an anticipated timeline of March 1st, 2024. Our board policy requires a minimum of 30 days advance notice, given the holidays and some of the coordination efforts associated with our sales outlets and our driver training. We identified March 1st. That'll make sure we have all the materials printed in time, everybody's trained up, all of the sales outlets have the new pricing. The Other next steps that we'll be working on and bringing back to you will be a fare policy with regard to making changes in the future, that we don't come back every 10 years or even every 5 years, but rather we know the intervals that we'll be coming back and by formula, an idea of what kind of changes we'll be making. Again, mentioned earlier, the upgrade in the fare equipment, we'll be using the one-time funds for that, and then leveraging all of our revenue opportunities to continue. There are other grant processes out there coming up in the near future. We talked about the state TIRSIP award cycle, but there's also federal grant opportunities that'll be coming up this year as well, potentially for demonstration or operations funds, but primarily for capital, and that'll help offset the need for things like Measure A in the future if we're able to obtain more capital funding over time. And then lastly, working with our local partners to, identify those economies of scale. I do believe there's real promise in, say, 2-3 years time from now, transitioning some of this service to a more affordable or more sustainable model, but that is all remains to be seen as we go through our bid processes and contract negotiations. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. Director Williams.
Can I just ask, and please put that one price slide, because I thought that was kind of important, that to understand that, we have a potential revenue, but we also have a real potential downside if we do this wrong. So I'm going to just probably advocate for whatever changes we do to do incrementally, I suppose do you recommend the option 2? Is that your personal recommendation?
I leave it to the board to decide how it likes to proceed, but in my experience, that Simpson curtain rule is pretty close to accurate. Where we've seen more significant changes take place, for example, if we were to cut routes at the same time that we reduce or increase fares, which is often what happens in transit, that can create a bit of a death spiral. What I would say is that if we go with, say, option 1, and we see the attrition drop immediately, we'll need to cut routes. We might not have enough people per bus to support keeping those routes. And, numerically, if you start to do that, then the number of trips available, the reliability of service can go down. With this, we're assuming a 1% drop per 3% increase. That would not negatively impact the number of buses we operate today. That is to say, we're operating at, close to 85% of what our prior ridership was when you scale it by the number of buses we're operating. We had 14 trips going out every day before. Today we have 10. The ridership is fairly close to what it was per bus prior to the pandemic. We just have so much less service out there that you're not seeing it in the aggregate ridership numbers. So if we were to scale over time, the county has talked with us about potentially implementing some demonstration routes. It's possible that we could see that ridership regain even closer to the 18-19 numbers from before the pandemic. Sorry, it was a bit more than you asked for a supervisor.
No,
but
that was good. I guess I would think that to me, the level, if you look at it over time, it's reasonable, but all at once, it's a big shock to the system, especially people who are already under strain of inflationary pressures. So I would advocate one of two things: either this more incremental option 2 implemented with a service increase, or next to no change. To me, one or the other of those options seems to be, if the goal is to go back to where we were, we can't go back to where we were with fare box return, but without the service, right? And I think that's a challenge, obviously, but Mr. Nelson and I have been doing a lot of debating here about how to use county transit funds, and one of the things that we've talked about is not only to be able to use it for sidewalk projects that go up to transit, but also how some of that should probably be used for the Clean Air Express.
Capps and then Hartman.
Thank you. I had a question along those lines of incremental. Does Sbcag have a policy of a time period by which we review fare increases? I understand, obviously, the pandemic delayed this conversation and all of the work that went into it and the survey, but to me, it seems like to have gone from 2009 to 2019 is a long time. 10 years to consider a new fare increase. And so I just wonder if there is a policy of how often this process kicks in.
Not yet. That is one of the actions I recommend we follow up with the board on with regard to adopting a formal policy that would periodically review fare pricing in relation to inflation or other aspects regarding the service.
Yeah, that's where I land, is that I certainly prefer an incremental, but with a commitment to revisit this more frequently than every decade.
Yes.
So that, again, we're just not providing that sticker shock of a 20% increase. I'm most concerned, I think, about our monthly riders and that survey correlation that many of them say, at least, and I get that it probably wouldn't be the full amount, but many say that they would drop off, and that's a big concern to me, to have them weather a 20% increase right off the bat. So where I'm leaning is to your option 2, but with the understanding that we don't wait a decade before we revisit this again, given costs.
Director Hartman.
I have a couple of comments. The first is, for me, the highest priority is increasing ridership and doing whatever we can. I think, with the new year, for example, all the gyms are offering discounts, trying to get people to have part of their resolution is new behavior. So I would like to know what more we can do and what we know about the drop in ridership. Gas prices are relatively high, so I would think that people would be using transit more. It may be that more people are working at home, and so do we know anything about the 85%? What happened to the other 15%?
Had that opportunity to do that kind of survey yet of lapsed riders, although it is potentially possible with some of our database information to reach out to folks that we know are no longer riding. In addition to changes within the job market and seeking their feedback, I would recommend that this board, in a few months' time, we'll be coming back to this board regarding a regional project for the North County that we're using some state funding to develop. It's the Low Carbon Transportation Operations Funding, LC-TOP. A few months back, you'll recall this board approved adopting a fare promotion program for all of the North County operators, including the Clean Air Express. It's not a significant amount of funding necessarily to say waive fares for all services or even necessarily for a period of time, but the goal being that we'll leverage that funding, which is roughly $500,000 for a year-long period, to provide promotions periodically throughout the year. Clean Air Express is included in that group. Our cost to ride is significantly more than, say, on the City of Lompoc's local service, but the idea being that we can leverage that regional program to increase ridership across all the operators, Clean Air especially.
So I, like Supervisor Capps, I think having a policy is important. I'm not sure how much information we need, though, to have the policy. So I'm not sure when. The other thing you mentioned was advertising income, and everything gets monetized. But if it can reduce rider fares and get more people, I would be very much in favor of that. So again, I guess I'm after your professional judgment, as was Supervisor Williams or Director Williams, and I think it's option 2.
We developed option 2 in light of the feedback we received through the survey. That, in and of itself, And with some of the considerable jump in the cash price in particular, cash riders or cash-only households do exist, right? They're generally at the 30% of households under a certain income level will operate with cash only due to studies from Pew Research and all kinds of think tank organizations. That jump from what we're at today of $7 to $10 would likely eliminate or at least almost entirely
And
reduce
that's
the
our
number
lower
of people.
income people, so we don't want to do that. Is that correct?
Well, we saw some similarities between the households and how they purchase and pay for their fares. So I won't necessarily make that connection, but what I will say is that for the infrequent riders that use cash, they responded in like kind as the other households, that they would stop riding the service at a similar rate. So approximately 50% of the people who use cash said that they would stop riding.
Director Rouse, and then we'll go to Director Lavanino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I know that having done elasticity studies over the years with our public parking system as well as MTD, and usually the incremental drop-off for every fee raise has been historical. We've seen that. But those fee raises never also include service increases or service enhancements, which is, very important of the public dialogue. And it was interesting when you mentioned BART as a comparative. Of course, obviously in the Bay Area, driving or parking or doing anything with an automobile is far less possibly convenient than it is in this county. So it's an entirely different thing. And I think that the nominal cost of ridership versus vehicle operation is something that I know over time we've done publicly. We've done outreach. We've done ad campaigns that said, by the way, when you come to Santa Barbara from Lompoc, it'll cost you X in a normal car as versus these rides. I think that helps the public's consciousness because they then can say, wait a minute, I really do. Yes, this went up 20% or whatever. And I agree with a phased-in concept. But headways and convenience and reliability is probably going to trump everything else when it comes to getting people on the buses. And number two is the comparison what it takes to actually operate your vehicle would be great. So that would be just my comments on that issue.
Director Lavanino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious were these responses anonymous, or do you know who the actual writer was? Especially, I'm most interested in the last question when it asked for their opinion, question 13.
Yes, so many of the riders provided their contact information. In addition to the questions that were responded to, we also have a process in place where we can track the IP addresses so no one person can issue a response twice from the same device. But that said, I think the number of people who provided contact information relative to the number of people who responded was roughly half. So we have a good sense of who half of the respondents are just based on that alone.
Okay. The reason why I'm asking is, okay, we want to hold on to this ridership. We just asked their opinion. It'd be great if these people got an actual personal, there's only 52 opinions. If we could, even if we're not going to do what they asked in their opinion, to just give them the courtesy of saying, we heard you and we're working on it, or, I think that'd go a long way to try to keep them on the bus. Number two is a lot of them mentioned the lack of Wi-Fi or the unpredictability of the Wi-Fi. That's, to me, one of the biggest selling points of being on the bus is that you can actually get work done while you're going to and from work, or you can, do whatever you want to do, surf the web, whatever. If they can't do that, to me, that'd be a great way to, at the same time, as Mayor Rouse was talking about, you want to give them something as you're asking for an increase. So I don't know what the status of the Wi-Fi is or why it's so difficult. I'm just curious if that's been addressed or what we're doing to improve that.
Sure, I can answer that quickly through the chair. We've acknowledged this issue at previous events, and through feedback from the riders have started a process to upgrade all of our routers and systems on board the buses. That said, we've only equipped 4 buses at this time and have yet to deploy them, but the prior item, the SB 125 item, included capital funding for the completion of the fleet. So we'll be rolling out new Wi-Fi systems, routers, tools for the riders to connect into when they get on board the bus.
Okay, great. My last comment is just, I think I saw this in a few of the answers too, was that people felt a little uncomfortable that there were so many questions. There was 4 or 5 questions about people's race. I understand whether or not they speak English or Spanish because you want to be able to advertise to them or talk to them in the language that they understand. But there were more than that, and it was a little bit off-putting for some of the writers and some of the responders. I'm just curious, why did we come up with these questions? Did we use a consultant, or how was this formulated?
We came up with the questions, but using the Federal Transit Administration's Title VI categoric classification process. So in essence, if we're going to be compliant and receive Federal Transit Administration funds, we need to comply with Title VI. Title VI requires that we do not take any adverse actions against protected classes. Presently, because we're considered a small agency with less than 50 buses that pull out per day, our requirements are lessened. However, the survey was designed in such a way that should the system grow, we can continue to use that template going forward. In other words, our survey was in the spirit of the Title VI needs and requirements, but I understand it's a bit off-putting necessarily to answer a lot of personal questions like that. Unfortunately, they are required when it comes to the Federal Transit Administration.
Well, that's a great answer, and I think that the people that responded that way, that's why I'm talking about that little personal interaction, is just letting them know that, hey, that's a valid concern. Unfortunately, because of the federal laws, Title VI, we have to kind of ask this.
Through the chair, there was one writer in particular who left their phone number so we could call them back about that specifically, and so we explained that to them.
All right, Director Nelson.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Osborne. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Looking at the 2 options, I'm more inclined to support option 1. I know there's some discussion about option 2. I know one of the big concerns with option 1 might be the single trip customers. I wonder if we might be able to look at a hybrid of the 2, where we phase in the single trip with more of our lower income riders with something similar from option 2, but then deal with the option 1 increases in 2024 for the monthly pass and 10 rider ticket book. So that's where I'm at as we move forward.
We'll come to Director Perotti and then go back to Director King.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Well, we all did receive a letter from Move Santa Barbara, Strong Towns, Sierra Club, and Cause. And they did mention the idea of possibly having our lobbyist. And I think you mentioned that maybe we are looking for funding to help us out. Is that something our lobbyist would let us know about? And how does that work?
Lobbyists as well as staff are targeting any and all additional funding. And we, for what it's worth, the Sbcag agency has been fairly successful with those competitive grants, whether they're on the transit side or elsewhere. We've got a pretty good track record here in this county.
Oh, thank you for that. And also, I'm personally leaning more towards option 2. When I first read this report, I was struggling on the fact that, 100 for the monthly pass, 150 to 180 may not seem like a lot to some of us, but it does mean a lot to low-income folks that are barely getting around, and I'm concerned about doing that. I will say, and I like the idea of having a policy in place so people kind of know when the fare increase might be proposed again and discussed. So I like a lot of the conversation that we've had here today.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
And Commissioner Perotti, we can't hear you well when you talk away from the microphone.
Okay,
You have
I'm
to
sorry.
Talk right into the microphone.
That's
okay. I'm just want to let you know.
No,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry that you can't hear me. basically, I was saying that 150 to 180 may not seem like a big increase, but it is to some. That's the bottom line. So that's why I was really struggling with that. And I think doing it slowly would be more appropriate, in my opinion.
Director King, have the microphone.
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. I also agree that option number 2, I think it would be more equitable for people rather than just slapping them in the face with a major increase. And if you take a look at the survey, that it says how often do people ride? It's like daily is like a little bit more than 50%. How do you typically pay? Almost 50% is a month. And then how would this impact the use of Clean Air Express service if they increase the rates? And about 50% said they would ride the same, but I feel that it wouldn't be equitable for a lot of people, as Director Perotti pointed out and said that, you know, that $30 increase might be a lot to some people. So I think that the incremental would be in the best interest of the public.
We'll go back to Director Nelson.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. So if we don't raise the rates or raise them slower, that means we'll have to mine other funds to make up the difference for the operations, right?
Could be a decline of $200,000 a year in revenue. That would be assuming the rider loss at the rate identified by the survey. And then on the high end, it was not as significant of a gain as the option 2, but still did not necessarily overcome the loss in ridership. Option 2,
because nobody could hear you at first in North County, could you just repeat that? I think what you just said is that option 1 loses more money than option 2. Is that what you just said?
There's the risk of that, potentially. Assuming both the Simpson-Curtin rule and the ridership survey, on the low end, the ridership survey would indicate an approximate loss of about $200,000. So keep in mind, we lose 50% of the ridership, or 48.7% of the ridership, but then we gain, close to, depending on the weighting of the past products and the analysis we've done, is close to about is a negative $200,000 impact. So there is some gain per passenger, but because of the number of riders that we've now lost a significant more in revenue. The option 2, and I'll have to pull up my slide. I don't think we're sharing it more. That shows on the low end a net increase of $24,000 over the year, given the expected loss in ridership of about 7%. So we've raised rates incrementally. We've lost 7% of the ridership. We've gained $24,000. On the high end, we gain the full 20% that's proposed in the fair pricing system. So again, no increase in ridership estimated, just no loss. And so that would be an increase of $100,000 year over year. Option 1.
I appreciate.
Yep.
Sorry, I appreciate that explanation. That helps actually quite a bit, Aaron. So, I'm more inclined to support option 2 based on that. But to go back to, I think, some of the conversation that was happening today about a policy in place to be looking at this on a more regular basis. I think if we move forward with option 2, we should have something in place that would be almost automatic for July of 2027. Once we get done with these approved, maybe we could be looking at a CPI or something that would have in place that we can round up to on an annual basis, so that we don't have to be looking at such a significant risk on such a large fare increase in the out years.
All right, so as the representative of what I see is nearly 60% of your ridership and 50% of your daily and nearly 50% of the monthly and 10 ride pass, and also recognizing my community, option 2 makes the most sense. And the reason I say that is many of the comments also talked about those missing 4 routes, or routes that do not exist, that maybe weren't the 4 or routes that are missing, but new routes. And so if we don't start planning and trying to make sure that we have fare box recovery so that we can move to returning routes or adding new routes that would increase ridership for those that we don't accommodate, because of the amount of people that do commute out of Lompoc to the rest of the county for work, it will be detrimental. Waiting and not, we've seen that locally in Lompoc where prior councils made the decision not to raise rates on utilities, and we're going to see sticker shock when we do that. So not doing any sort of adjustment is a dangerous habit. So for me, option 2 makes the most sense, and I would also love to see when you come back and talk about incentivizing riders, and hearing the discussion that we don't want to disaffect those cash riders who may be riding occasionally, may not see the value in buying a monthly pass. Maybe incentivize those that are utilizing cash to buy that 10-ride pass book, because that's not a monthly, it expires. That 10-ride pass book is of value. So if we can incentivize that towards our cash riders, find ways to supplement and help them purchase something that helps reduce their costs and allows for their more non-scheduled rides or lack of needing to use it for a full month, I think that would help us not lose some of those cash riders and find ways to help them balance their budget and keep them riding where we might lose them when the rate goes up. So again, I appreciate you listening. I did want to ask, I saw that it averaged about 35 people responded. Do we know what is our actual ridership so that we got a good percentage of? Sure. Yeah.
So the metric we used was the number of one-way trips. On average, both AM and PM, to identify what our prospective universe of riders is on a given day, and it's 256 riders per day.
And so I just wanted the public to be aware that we did actually get a pretty good response, given the ridership. All right, is there any public comment on this item?
Chair Osborne, there's no request for public comment in Santa Barbara or online.
Do we have any requests for public comment in Santa Maria?
None in Santa Maria.
Thank you. Seeing none, I'll bring it back for a motion. Director Williams.
I'll attempt to incorporate some of the comments I've heard into a motion. So I'll move that we approve option 2 with the direction to bring back prospective costs of improving the internet and with the guidance of the emphasis on the, moving people from the singles to the 10-ride pass as articulated by Mayor Osborne, and also with prospective options for increasing one trip a day.
And I would second, but would you consider advertising revenues as well?
Absolutely. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave that up.
Director Clark, you had your mic on and you don't appear to be seconding. All right, okay. Did staff, I saw some confusion. Is there any clarity needed on any portion of that motion?
I'll go back and listen to the video.
Okay. Wanted to make sure you got it if you needed it, or if there's anyone else who needs clarity on that motion from the board.
Madam Chair, was there a second?
There was. We got clarity and had a second from Director Hartman.
Thank you.
All right. It's been moved. It's been seconded. Please call the vote.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Lavanino?
Aye.
Infante?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Parodi?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passes 13-0.
Thank you. All right. We'll move on to item 5D. Would you please read that into record?
Item 5D, regional broadband. Receive a presentation on project completed by Eco Alliance and the San Ynez Band of Chumash Indians to improve broadband regionally through what is called the North County Fiber Ring.
All right. Good morning, Chair Osborne and directors. So this morning we have a presentation to be given from one of our broadband partners. As you know, there's a number of different efforts going on regionally on broadband, and so today's presentation is, as indicated in the recommendation for the board, is from a partnership of Econ Alliance and the San Ynez Band of Chumash Indians that competed and successfully received a grant from the United States Department of Commerce, the Economic Development Administration, and it was to look at additional broadband middle mile, which is complementary to statewide efforts that are being done by the California Department of Technology, and then also complementary of work that Sbcag and our partners are doing to implement last mile connections in the county. The grant was in the amount of approximately $500,000 and was secured in 2022. And so the grantees had asked that they be presenting some of the recommendations that are before them to take action on to our board for information and see how it relates and any questions to provide synergies as we're working together on these efforts going forward. Over the last year, Sbcag, in our role as broadband, as that's been expanding, we've met a few times with the Econ Alliance and the Chumash to understand the progress that they've made on this grant work. And now that it's complete, they're ready to provide a short presentation on those work products. So leading that presentation will be a consultant that was retained by that group, John Harton of Teleworks, and he's on Zoom today. And at this point, I'll just hand it over to him, and he'll lead the presentation. And then if there's any questions at the end, either for them, they'll be prepared to ask, or for Sbcag staff as it relates to our efforts as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Fred. I trust everybody can hear me. If that's not the case, please let me know. And Fred and I are going to coordinate on the slide progression. So this is a slide that sets the stage and captures the background and scope of what we've done over the last 9-10 months. We commenced in January. We pretty well wrapped up the project in October. And now we've been having update sessions for all of the stakeholders around the county. So the objective of this project was to take a look at the middle mile requirements. Middle mile is there to positively influence the economics of the last mile. Middle mile alone is not enough. You need an end-to-end network. But without good middle mile, we're gonna be stalled and shunted in reaching the ultimate goal, which is activating everyone within northern Santa Barbara County and beyond, of course. Part of the scope is the high-level designs. So in middle mile design, it's, think in terms of a highway network, that's the predominant emphasis. There's also middle mile spurs. The work that is, for reference, the work that is being conducted by California Department of Technology is fundamentally about the highway designs, the primary fiber around the primary roadways. And then we, as part of this scope, we engage in the business case, and the specification was to take a look at 3 different governance and business models. Those 3 models are a private standalone, a private sector solution, a public sector solution, and then a hybrid or a public-private partnership. So as Fred aptly stated, this was an independent effort through the Economic Development Agency. I do want to acknowledge all the work, not only from the Econ Alliance and the Chumash, but the terrific stakeholders, many of which are on the The other thing that was very primary is this California Middle Mile. That was this grant was actually, or this award from the EDA was actually timed before a lot of this middle mile was ramping up. And very importantly, all of our work was designed and directed towards complementing the work that is still underway with the California Middle Mile Initiative, led by the California Department of Technology. The lower part of this slide, you'll see the way it was truncated in terms of our deliverables. The first one was the broadband market analysis, where we took a very rigorous look at what is going on in northern Santa Barbara County with respect to both endpoint or last mile connections as well as the middle mile. And then, as I had alluded to earlier, we took a look at 2 ring options, and then we into the business plan to arrive at a recommendation, an optimal recommendation that ties into this notion of a financially viable middle mile network. Very important. Okay, Fred, if you'll advance, please. This project resulted in a recommendation, an analysis and recommendations that's over 100 pages. So out of necessity, we're really consolidating much. And this captures some of the key takeaways from the market analysis. And it's a pretty good story. Within northern Santa Barbara County, 96% of the current locations are served, or in the quote unquote served category according to the FCC. Of those 96%, 98% have access at speeds of greater than 120. So, the simple subtraction is we have a 4% problem that are in the category of unserved. Now, importantly, it's not CPUC has a different number than the FCC. That's 10%. So from the CPUC database and their records, they would say it's a 10% problem. Well, importantly, we consider both. We use through this document the FCC data because it gives us a richer and more granular set of data to do the work that we need to do. But do want to make that notable point. We expect in the future those numbers will converge. And if anyone has been following the news with the BEAD financing, which is from the FCC, that will be one step in the direction of converging data between the FCC and the CPUC. So we're starting out from a position of in reasonably good shape in contrast to other rural areas around the country. But that doesn't help anyone who's sitting with in an unserved or underserved state. So there's work to be done. The middle area of this slide talks about what's view that says we really don't want to be dwelling on 120 megabit internet connections. The FCC has launched an inquiry that says the national standard should be a gigabit on the downlink, 500 megabits on the uplink. And the more or less of it is that's where we're going with a lot of our work, and that's what everyone is facilitating. But there are different thresholds that are out there today. And when we look at how does the northern Santa Barbara County area stack up, well, there's a lot of areas that do lack that. In fact, about 50% of the county northern Santa Barbara County lack access to that emerging standard, that emerging threshold of a gigabit, 500 megabits internet service, broadband service. Again, work to be done. And then we look at kind of a more nuanced view that says, well, what about the market competition? I mean, I might have service, but am I happy with my that there are some loose monopolies, some virtual monopolies, simply because there's only one offer. There's only one option in up to or more than 60% of the census blocks. And that's juxtaposed against a situation where the economics, the demographics, the density would suggest that there's room for a second player. So middle mile will help encourage more players to enter the market, delivering more competition in northern Santa Barbara County, in a better functioning market across the county. So those are some of the key takeaways from the market assessment. Let's turn our attention to the next slide, where we talk about our recommendation. So there's a lot on this slide. Let's take a look at the right side first. And the purple line is the middle mile recommendation, or I should say the coming out of the California Department of Technology. It had been referred to as Phase 1. And the green line is the work that we've engaged in our interest in complementing what's coming out of CDT. And then we've run through various scenarios, various options, and we've settled on this route that you see, and I'll elaborate on this a little bit more in the next slide. But this would be the ultimate augment to the California Department of Technology's Phase 1. And on the left side of this slide, what you will see is the iterative nature of this project this year. So, if our goal is, and it is, to complement, we need to fix the target. And it's been a moving target, but the final recommendation from California Department of Technology was September 15th. This is and you'll see that when they got started, middle mile, then it was a reduced middle mile, which really, cut the accessibility. If you were to measure served locations within 5 miles, all the way down to 52%, they reconsidered, and they're now sitting at a base recommendation, which is both the Phase 1 and Phase 2, that is more expanded. We come in at the very bottom and say we can do better, and we can do better by delivering a more cost-effective design. Let's say a design that has a shorter route, costs less, provides more coverage, and provides a ring closure at Las Cruces, which gives more robustness and more resiliency to the network. And it's important to note that we've shared this with CDT, and this was probably 6 to 8 weeks ago. We have done far more work than they'll ever have the time to do, given that their remit is the county or the entire state. So to let them know, and they were very receptive of the work that has been conducted through this project. Okay, Fred, if you'll advance to the next slide. So as I stated, the project outline was for 2 different route options to look at, and then we cycle them through various business models. And the highway network is fairly stable. There's little variation. There is some variation in the last mile spurs, or the middle mile spurs rather, based on whether it's a private or a public or a public-private partnership. And there are also some variations that we capture, which is the distinction and the differences amongst the business cases in costs as well. So the financial, so we take this business model and we look at it from a financial standpoint. How do they work as we flow the different options? And then importantly, we do a scenario review. So it's very important that it's not an academic study, but it's through outreach with the various stakeholders, including the ISP community, including CDT, including Golden State Connect. We get a pretty hardened, if you will, or a valid point of view and perspective to make sure that our numbers are spot on. And then we distill it into the recommendations and scenarios. So those are the 3, that's the process with which we apply to the analysis of the various business models. Fred, if you'll advance to the next slide. So this is the answer, so to say. So in a sense, we have two parts to the answer. One is the recommendation. One was the design that we covered, the physical route design that we covered in the earlier slide. And this is the business model, the governance model that wins out. And the reason it wins out is on cost and sustainability. So you can see that in this scenario, it's a private ISP that would own that middle mile. CDT is very receptive, in fact, receptive plus for private solutions, private ISPs engaging in the California middle mile. Why? Because there's only so much distance you can get out of their $3+ billion budget. And their budget is insufficient to cover the entirety of the 10,000 mile initiative. So they're quite receptive to that. And then the important note here is that if the business case was profound and really strong, this would have been done many years ago. It hasn't. So it's not the best in all scenarios. It's not the best business case, financial case that the world has ever seen. But it is positive. It is a positive business case, and the IRU, indefeasible right to use, or let's call it a lease of dark fiber. That would be a linchpin that says, I'm the private ISP, I will do this provided CDT leases that route from me to extend their middle mile network. And the other benefits of this scenario is it's less public funds, and it's a bit simpler and less complex from an implementation standpoint. Fewer deals, fewer negotiations to complete. Right, if you'll advance to the next slide. And I've got a couple slides remaining, and then we'll see if there's any questions. But this is this kind of a summary of the recommended scenario where we have, from an ISP's perspective, why do they want to do this? Well, in part because there's strategic value, and that's a good thing. The more strategic value, the more interested they're going to be in engaging. And that strategic value is the ISPs are not only in the business of last mile. So the more middle mile, the broader the middle mile network, the more they're inclined to capture and further invest in last mile. But it's also to serve as a thoroughfare. If I can get through northern Santa Barbara County Santa Barbara County with middle mile, I can get my routes going into LA and get my routes going north to the northern counties in San Francisco, the major internet pops. So there's strategic value. That's a very important point. The middle column is the positive NPV, and it's a positive internal rate of return as well. From an NSBC perspective, why is this attractive? Well, it gets important to say that you're reducing the unserved and the underserved. We're facilitating economic development. And then we're enhancing digital equity. We're building the foundations to enhance digital equity. Why would CDT like this? It reduces it relieves some pressure on their budget. It's if you remember that slide from the previous slide, it slightly increases their coverage, and it reduces their timelines because it's easier to execute on. So this is kind of the summary as to why this surfaces as the optimal or the optimal scenario. And then we have one more slide, kind of a final slide that we look at, the key findings and summary recommendations. The key findings we've touched on it. There is a pressing need for a robust middle mile and last mile infrastructure in northern Santa Barbara County. We touched on this lack of broadband market competition. There are markets, there are areas of the county, northern Santa Barbara County, that can support second carriers. Sometimes the great enabler, in cases the great enabler will be more robust middle mile. And then we've looked at these opportunity zones for broadband that with some that we've applied, there are, in a very granular way, we've cited, north of 20 broadband opportunity zones where the economics, make sense. And that's both for fiber, last mile fiber, as well as fixed wireless, which is also a viable alternative. And in some cases, it's the only alternative. And then we closed with the recommendations and next steps. Well, we've touched on and covered the option 2, which is the additional 56 miles of middle mile, and the scenario, the optimal scenario, which is the private ISP standalone. And then when we move into the next steps, the timing couldn't be better. CDT has issued a request for innovative ideas for this so-called phase 2, and they've asked for responses or an input by, and it's unsolicited, it's anyone who has input, by the more or less the end of January. We have while we've covered it with them already, we have more data, more information for their consideration, since they will be a primary stakeholder particularly in the middle mile. And then the leadership at Econ Alliance and the Shumash will also, and others, and that will be, you'll be hearing from the Econ Alliance leadership, will encourage stakeholder engagement and support for these recommendations and really for the initiative. Let's make sure Northern Santa Barbara County, and more broadly Santa Barbara County, is adequately addressed in these middle mile, in the CDT initiative. With that, I will end my comments, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to address.
Thank you so very much for the update and the details of potential proposals moving forward. Do any of the board members have questions? Anyone in Santa Maria? All right.
None here.
Thank you. Hearing none, we thank you for the update. This is a receive and consider potential things later. So thank you for that. And we will move on to item 5E.
Chair Osborne,
Yeah.
there was no public comment for that
thank
item.
you.
Okay, 5E, election of officers for 2024. Elect board chair and vice chair for 2024.
All right. So historically, as our agenda item reflects, there have been alternations between North and South and alternations between city and Board of Supervisor leadership. And in looking at this, I saw that we need a city leadership as potentially as our vice chair. And I had a chat after looking at the history and where we were in the rotation. And I asked Mayor Rouse if he would be interested in serving as vice chair, and he has given a thumbs up. Before I make a motion, is there anyone else who would like to be considered for chair or vice chair? Hearing none, I'll make a motion that Vice Chair Lavanino become our chair and Mayor Rouse become our vice chair for the 2024 year, and would look for a second on that.
It's been like 2014.
Second.
And Hartman gave us our second. We don't usually take public comment on this, do we? Do we do? All right, is there anybody who'd like to make public comment on this?
Chair Osborne, I see no request for public comment.
Any in Santa Maria? All
None.
right, thank you. Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Director Williams.
Aye.
Capps.
Aye.
Hartman.
Aye.
Nelson. Gone. Lavanino.
Aye.
Infante.
Aye.
Julian.
Aye.
King,
Aye.
Patino,
Aye.
Perotti,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Rouse,
Same response as Lavanino. Aye.
and Chair Osborne.
Aye.
Motion passed 12-0.
Thank you. Welcome aboard, Director Rouse, and thank you for your willingness to serve. All right, we'll move on to item 6, Executive Director's Report. Madam Kern.
Madam Chairperson, members of the board, before I give my Executive Director's Report, I'd like to answer a question that was asked prior to the meeting by Director Perotti, and Aaron Bonfilio of my staff will be able to answer, but I guess you want to ask the question up in public, so thank you.
Yes, thank you. My question was about where are we at with Metrolink? You know, it's exciting that the city of Goleta is getting ready to break ground on our new train depot, and we would certainly like to
Excuse
see.
me, Madam Chair, we couldn't hear that.
I'm sorry.
Commissioner.
I'm going to put the microphone in my mouth. No. I'm holding it, so it reminds me to speak directly into it. Thank you for that. I asked the question about Metrolink and where we're at, and my concern is that we have a train depot that's getting ready to break ground in Goleta, and it's all very exciting, and we'd like to see trains going through it and commuter rail. So I just, an update on where we're at and what's the next steps with that. Thank you.
Describe the process where we were at. We were waiting on a cost proposal from Metrolink, we being Sbcag and VCTC, the Ventura County Transportation Commission. Metrolink is working on that cost proposal for the service. In addition, Losan believes it may be able to provide the service as well as an alternative at potentially a lower cost using some state equipment that is becoming available in the not too distant future, that is rail cars in another area of the state are being decommissioned and potentially made available. So Losan is looking into that as an option as well. So we plan to bring back 2 options to the board for consideration. Separately and in tandem with that, we're working with Losan to secure an agreement or at least a letter of intent dedicating that morning slot, the availability for that train, so that irrespective of the operator, the operation scenarios that we pursue, we at least have that slot committed and dedicated to the region for that time period.
Great. Thank you very much.
Back to my report. Thank you, Madam Chairperson, members of the board. I want to announce that we've hired 2 new employees for Sbcag to our team, Rebecca Irwin and Eric Noriega. Rebecca will be supporting Fred Luna in project delivery, and Eric will be helping Traffic Solutions and Clean Air Express promote alternative modes of transportation throughout the county. So welcome to our team. I would also like to announce we have a new website. Check it out, please. After a year of development, we launched our new website a couple of weeks ago. The new website features a sleeker look, feel, and it provides information that is accessible to all of our community, including those with visual and hearing challenges. We also released a request for proposals for consultant services to prepare a programmatic EIR, environmental impact report or document for our broadband installations. Proposals are due in January, and at the completion of the project is anticipated to be done in early 2025. And I also want to congratulate the new chair and vice chair, so thank you for volunteering your time and efforts to Sbcag. And looking forward to 2024, I want to give a heads up to the board members that we have appointments to committees at our January meeting. So let us know if you're interested in serving on all of the committees that we have throughout the state, as well as local committees. We are planning to have a Measure A workshop. We try to do this as a standalone meeting, but we had difficulty doing so because of your air district meetings and other conflicts. So we plan to do it at the board meeting itself in January. And it would be really, really nice if folks could come to Santa Barbara to attend that meeting in person. It will be a really in-depth discussion about Measure A and our strategic plan that we're planning to update this year.
And then last but not least, I'm looking forward to our my one-on-one check-ins with each of the board members. Terry's reaching out to each of you to schedule that. It could be a lunch or whatnot, whatever you prefer, but I always look forward to having that one-on-one time with you all. And that's part of my New Year tradition, so thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right. Seeing none, we'll move to our Caltrans District Director's Report.
All right. Good morning, Chair Osborne and fellow directors. Pleasure to be here today. I have a few items for you. First is that Caltrans was awarded $8 million for a Gaviota Pass Wildlife Connectivity Project. This is a new FHWA competitive funding program called Wildlife Crossings Pilot Program. And it's actually pretty neat in that we applied this is the only project in the entire state of California under that program that was funded. $8 million will be able to focus on improved wildlife fencing along the corridor and upsizing a culvert so that wildlife can pass under. And the specific location is between Gaviota, the southern end of Gaviota State Park, all the way up to the 101 Los Cruces interchange. So great news there. There were 19 projects awarded in 17 states at $110 million total, and $8 million of that came to Santa Barbara County. And then the next thing I'd like to announce is the Federal Rail Administration announced $1 million in grants for Central Coast Rail Service improvements. So it's broken into two separate efforts. The first is $500,000 for the Central Coast corridor between its new service being considered between San Jose and San Luis Obispo. So the funding would really be focused on scoping out that effort. And it would be, it's currently served by the Coast Starlight, which is always a challenge in terms of timing, but no other services. And so the grant would be used to develop a scope and schedule and cost estimate for a new service and a service development plan. And then San Jose to Salinas and Santa Cruz to Watsonville segments would also be assessed as part of that effort. And then the other grant, which is again $500,000, is for the Losan corridor, and it would be looking to clarify enhancing the current service between San Luis Obispo and San Diego with an extension south to San Ysidro, California. And it'll look at new frequencies and improvements to reliability. And again, the grant will be used to develop a scope, schedule, and cost estimate for the expanded service. And then the last thing I want to highlight is this Tuesday, we held a public meeting related to 154 on Fox and Canyon Road on 154 on Los Olivos. It was well attended. It included presentations, informational displays, and an opportunity for anybody that attended to talk to team members. So from what I'm hearing, it was an engaged group of participants. We received a lot of feedback, and we are looking into both short and long-term improvements at that location through safety funding. Happy to take any questions if you have any.
Director Hartman.
I had on two topics. First, the wildlife corridor. I believe that the team that's been looking at this has not yet received the final report. Is that correct?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I know that the report is coming together, but I hadn't heard if it's been released publicly yet.
Okay.
But
and
I would assume that as soon as it's available.
Yeah, well done, and congratulations on that $8 million. And I can't help but think that the work of that group and the consultants has played into the grant application and the success of that. The other thing, I just wanted to thank you so much for the Highway 154 meeting with your staff on Tuesday that resulted after a very impassioned July meeting of this Highway 154 Safety Committee here of Sbcag, and I mean, it showed that Caltrans is responsive. You heard the community, you went out there, you studied, you came back, and people were extremely appreciative. I think the only thing I would add is there was a lot of focus, as the community asked, on the Boxing Canyon intersection. There's still concern about the corridor overall and how to reduce speeds there and what we've done elsewhere. So that issue is still on the table as far as the community is concerned. But John Olnick and your staff were absolutely superb, and thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Any questions for Caltrans from Santa Maria?
Hang on. Okay. No, there aren't any questions to Santa Maria.
Thank you, Alice. All right, we will close the Caltrans report and come back to committee meetings. Does Director Nelson have any Calvan reports? All right, he has been in a Calvan's meetings, so he may be into that and not able to join us. Director Williams, any LoSAN report?
Well, there continues to be a lot of conversations about the interface of fares between LoSAN and Metrolink, because they do, previously were able to use each other's tickets, and I suppose the other issue is continuing work to shore up our the fact that our rails along the coast are very vulnerable. And I should take the opportunity to say that we went out with our local legislative delegation and the chair of the LoSAN Legislative Committee to look at some of the vulnerabilities via high rail north of Tehigas. That was quite interesting and illuminating. Additional projects to be requesting state aid upon.
Thank you for that. All right, we'll now go to 1-minute reports, and Director Hartman.
Yes, the CTC staff was in town in the Solvang and Santa Ynez Valley, led by Mike Becker and Sarkis. And we had an opportunity yesterday to tour the Santa Ynez Valley Regional Trail, and they seemed extremely interested. It turns out that the head of ATP has a long-standing relationship and close friendship to Sarkis, and so she was very open to answering his questions and giving us all tips, and so we really appreciate that. I think sometimes we don't fully know and understand human relationships. It all starts with that, and to have well-connected staff who are so highly regarded makes our job a lot easier. So thank you so much, Sarkis, and also to Mike Becker.
Anyone else here in Santa Barbara have a 1-minute report? Anyone in Santa Maria have a 1-minute report?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, this is Director Infante. A couple of things real quick. First, we were talking about the middle mile. I got an email for a webinar that's going to be presenting the final report on that middle mile. I presume everybody else has that. If they do not, I'll be glad to forward it to them if you let me know. That's going to be on Friday, 15th at 9:30 a.m. It's a web report. Also, I had the opportunity to go to the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant and take a tour through that. If you haven't done that, I recommend it if you get the opportunity. It is quite spectacular what they do, and the safety and backup on that is quite amazing. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, that's it at North County. Thank you.
All right. And for those of you that want to participate in the webinar but can't because the city mayor's meeting starts at 10 in Lompoc tomorrow, there will be a recording and Econ Alliance will email that out. Seeing no other 1-minute reports, we will adjourn. Our next meeting will be January 18th of 2024. Happy holidays.